We've actually done that experiment a few times.
With the beard?
With the beard.
This is not only a beard, it's a beard in some cases, but in some cases it's a yeast inoculation.
Oops.
Sorry.
Welcome once again to Chill Filtered, the podcast where we drink whiskey so you don't have to. But you probably are, you probably should, all those crazy things. We appreciate you guys. Thanks for joining us today. We are really excited about this episode. What our guest today, as you've probably seen in the title of the podcast, our guest today is probably one of my most looked forward to. Like, one day, maybe we'll have this guy on and it'll be so cool. And that day has come. But before we talk about anything regarding our guest, before we talk about any whiskey, about life, or anything like that, let's talk about some business. The business is simple this week. We are going to be sending out our secret sample share, Secret Santa details and everything this week on Patreon. If you're not on Patreon, consider joining. It's patreon.com/chillfiltered. But if you are already on Patreon, or rather, if you're not on Patreon at all and you still want to be able to join the Secret Sampler 2024, hit us up on Instagram. We're not going to advertise it on Instagram. If you're listening to this episode, consider yourself an insider. That is that. And then also we're doing our gifts this year. We have up to 6 bottles, at least 4 bottles are being given away for the Christmas gifts going down this year. Well, you've heard it in the prior episodes, so just keep it in mind. We're hoping maybe we can the gifts can be received by probably about December 16th or so. So keep that in mind if you're going to send gifts. That's the business for this week. Bryan, before we get into our very special guest, you have anything to say?
Well, okay. Wilderness Trail.
Yeah, bring it on.
Very early on in my whiskey journey, I fell in love with Wilderness Trail just from the sheer whiskey alone. And then I learned about all the science and all the biology and chemistry and all the interests that they have that are science related. And it just like catapulted them into one of my favorite brands of all time. And I have gone out of my way to get both 6-year versions, both 8-year versions. And now, thanks to their extreme generosity, they have provided us the 7-year rye here, which I believe was distillery only release. They are graciously letting us try it on this episode here, where all 3 of us going to drink it. We're going to talk about all their standard releases, though, for sure. Talk about what's available in stores right now, and talk about the single barrel program too. Super looking forward to it. I'm ready.
Okay. Before we take on our very special guest, this is actually our 4th episode that we've ever done on Wilderness Trail. Episode 147, we did their single barrel bourbon, or a single barrel bourbon. Episode 199, we did a straight rye. And then episode 232, almost 100 episodes ago, we did their black label rye bourbon at 8 years old. And everyone we loved. And let's bring them on. We got Dr. Pat Heist. And I'm pronouncing Heist right, like, bank heist, right?
Yep,
Dr.
that's
Pat?
exactly right.
That's great. So Dr. Pat, Bryan and I know a lot about you from research as well as our prior episodes. We talk in history segments, and we love getting into the backgrounds of people, the backgrounds of whiskey. Tell us your educational background as well as who you are.
So I skipped kindergarten. I will say that.
Nice.
So I just went straight to 1st grade. There wasn't any problem with it. Never had any issues. So that's where it all started. But, getting into college, like a lot of people who are, I had an interest in science getting out of high school. I actually was awarded the Senior Science Award. I don't know exactly how I got that in high school.
Nice.
Maybe my grades or something. But anyhow, when I got into college, like a lot of young people who don't understand all the options for science, you just think there's pre-med, there's pharmacy, there's dental school, and there's veterinarian. What else is there in science if you're young,
Yeah.
And I didn't realize all the other possibilities. So I started off in pre-medicine. And then within the first 2 years of college, I took microbiology for the first time. And I just loved the subject. And I switched my major over to microbiology. So I got a bachelor's degree in microbiology. once again, I kind of found myself at a precipice. I was actually, my job at the time that I had a microbiology degree, my job was as a rear escort behind mobile homes, like wide load mobile homes.
Nice.
You see the guy with the blinking lights in the front and in the back.
Mm-hmm.
So I was either one of those, and
Nice.
that was my primary job at the time. And I could set up mobile homes. If you need two halves of a double wide put together, I'm your man. Need some under.
Nice.
You know? So anyhow, once I kind of scouted my job opportunities with my bachelor's degree in microbiology, I remember the best thing that I could find available was a job as quality assurance manager for Chef America, who makes hot pockets. So
Hot Pockets.
You know, yes. I'm gonna keep going here, guys. I'm gonna play my
part. Man. This is what we're in.
We want the whole story.
Yeah. So I took a summer job working for the Department of Plant Pathology. Really didn't even have any. I mean, I never thought about going to graduate school, to be honest with you, until around that time. And I took a job for the Department of Plant Pathology in the agricultural college at University of Kentucky, which is where I got my microbiology degree. Nice. And plant pathology is the study of how microorganisms affect field crops and things. So I did a lot of work for them over that summer. And then at the end of the summer, one of the professors that thought I was doing a great job just literally asked me, "Hey man, do you want to be a graduate student in this department?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, sure." Because that was my tuition. They're going to pay my tuition. They're going to give me a small stipend. I did the math on my trailer park job, and it was like extra $1.20 an hour, I think. So I was like, I think I'm going to take option B here, upgrade a little bit.
Nice.
So I ended up getting my master's degree and PhDs in plant pathology. And, you know, I did a short stint as a postdoc at University of Kentucky. Before that, I got a job as a medical microbiology professor at in Pikeville College.
So going from plant pathology to like medical, as in like human microbiology, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was kind of cool. I remember telling myself, "Look, dude, if you get this job, you're going to have to be learning this shit one night and then teaching it the next morning."
Yeah,
and
that's what teaching's all about.
One of my first evaluations that I got back, you know, I did the best I could. And one of the evaluations that I got back after year number 1, it said, "He may be a rookie, but he's still a pro." And it always stuck with me. I thought, oh man. And then starting my second year all the way through, I taught there for 6 or 7 years. Starting the second year, I was voted faculty of the year every year that I was there by the students.
Nice.
So it was
my professor was raving, I'm sure.
Yeah, I know, right? Lots of comments on the beard, I'm sure.
Well, I didn't have a beard back then.
Oh yeah,
I was going to have to wear a tie and proper clothes back then.
So tell us about Fulcrum before we go any further.
Yep. So, you know, the genesis of a lot of business and activities that I've been in starts back with Fulcrum. That's the band that I played in back in, I would estimate around 98 or 99 is when that band was started. And a friend of mine named Marcus, who I won't say his last name. I don't want people. I don't want your millions of followers to be flocking over.
Yeah, exactly. One of these days.
He's a drummer, and he was telling me about this guy he knew that he worked with. Actually, he worked for, and he was like, "Man, this guy's got a guitar. He's got a house. We can practice in his house, you know." And that's Shane Baker, my business partner in Wilderness Trail.
Nice.
The famous master distiller from Wilderness. So we started a Fulcrum back in, again, it was probably like 97, 98, right around there. And we played just local shows in around Danville, Kentucky. And we had, played a handful of originals and then also a bunch of cover songs. So we had, a couple hours set. We'd be ready to, I remember we played at this one, it wasn't a field party. It was actually at somebody's house. And the guy who ended up being our head of sales of Firm Solutions was actually at that party.
Nice.
And it's kind of interesting, went from being the lead singer to his boss a couple years later.
That's funny.
So if you did it, if you did it all over again, would you call your band name the Yeasty Boys?
Well, I did a research thing for the National Science Foundation a couple years ago, and my team was called the Yeasty Boys. So
Hell
I
yeah!
actually did have his name. Yeah, we're the name tag around DC for a couple days.
That's great. We're thinking of doing maybe our thumbnail involving the yeast or the Beastie Boys somehow turned into the Yeasty Boys. So you talked about Firm Solutions, which I remember from episode 147 where we first featured Wilderness Trail, that you co-owned, or at least partially owned, or maybe all owned, but a business called Firm Solutions.
Yep.
But I want to know not only about Firm Solutions, but I want to know when you made the turn of like, I got to start using this myself a lot in making, whiskey with, of course, we're talking about yeast. So yeah, please, I want to hear all about that.
So, I'm a microbiologist, and, kind of looking at how does a microbiologist fit into this industry? I mean, the most logical way is there's yeast, yeast makes the alcohol. And then when you kind of peel back the onion a little bit, you realize, oh, wow, there's enzymes involved with breaking down the starch. And so there's enzyme, biochemistry right there.
Yeah.
You got bacteria and wild yeast that can contaminate the fermenter. So there's some more microbiology going on. There's a lot of biochemistry and a lot of chemistry when you look at the fact that organic acids produced by bacteria and yeast condense with alcohols to form esters. And esters are what give bourbon the fruity flavors and the vanilla and a lot of the classic caramel and other things. So there's a lot of microbiology and biochemistry in this in this business. So that's kind of how I thought about getting into it. Now, at first, while I was a professor at the medical school, I started consulting for a company that sold yeast and fermentation products to fuel ethanol distilleries.
Oh, gotcha.
And so that was kind of a big thing because fuel ethanol is, first of all, there's over 200 fuel ethanol distilleries in North America. And collectively, they produce over 12 billion gallons of 200 proof ethanol every year.
Wow.
And that's what goes into your gas tank. That's what changes the gas from regular to mid-grade to super unleaded.
I did not
know. It's
fuel
ethanol that's made domestically here in the United States by fermenting and distilling corn. So it's all made from corn. So all that fuel ethanol. So those guys
God bless America.
It's unbelievable the amount of alcohol. But, whenever you're a yeast provider and you're looking for, where are those big customers, you look for the customers that's got the biggest fermenters.
Yeah.
And fuel, the biggest fermenter that you'll see in the whole bourbon industry is going to be about 150,000 gallons, which is that's a big ass fermenter.
Yeah.
Wilderness Trail, our largest fermenter, is 20,000 gallons. And we can get 60 barrels out of one batch, just kind of put it in perspective. A fuel ethanol plant typically will have a fermenter that's 860,000 gallons.
Holy
cow. 860,000 gallons. So the biggest fermenter I've ever seen is 1.2 million gallons. So over 1 million gallons larger than the biggest fermenter you'll even find in the bourbon industry.
Does that bubble violently, like a fermenter that big? Like watch out for how much carbon dioxide is poisoning the air around you. Well,
I saw a guy who was close to 7 foot tall and weighed probably 380 pounds get thrown up in the air about 9 feet when the manway of a fermenter came open. That's how much back pressure.
Dang.
Yeah. Serious.
That's crazy.
That's insane.
Cool, though.
But anyhow, my point with the fuel ethanol is they're making such huge quantities of this stuff, and they're selling it for a fraction of what you get out of, a bottle of bourbon, for example. So they have to be very highly sophisticated. So we actually learned a lot of sophistication from that industry because they don't care anything about flavor, but they're trying to wrench every drop of alcohol out of every kernel of grain. So we learned a lot of sophistication, a lot of really cool technology. I mean, how do you keep track of the process at a facility that makes more than the entire bourbon industry makes in a day? You know, I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So did you work with them with firms like some of these like major like fuel ethanol places a lot with Firm Solutions?
Yeah. So that kind of leads into, so I was helping other companies out. Then Shane and I came together and we started Firm Solutions. Yep. Nice. So that was back in 2006. We started Firm Solutions. 2013 is when we started Wilderness Trail.
Nice. Now, I imagine there's a big difference in the type of yeast used at the fuel places and in bourbon. Is that correct or no?
Well, you know, this gets to a really good point and kind of how people think about things. You know, you think of, and this is why in Firm Solutions, we're very careful about how we label our yeast. You know, we can have a strain that would make a really great rum. Okay. But if we put rum on the label anywhere, then somebody who's making whiskey is immediately going to think, well, I don't want my whiskey to taste like rum. Wow. You know, it's like, it doesn't work that way. So you can have, our experience has been, you can have, as if it's a good strain and it fits. A lot of times when we're picking a yeast based on, I mean, of course we want to make the best tasting beer or spirit or whatever we're making. But the other side of the coin is there is a term called attenuation. How much sugar is used up, okay? And we want a yeast that has what's called full attenuation. That means it uses up 100% or nearly 100% of all the sugar so that you make as much alcohol as possible. You know, and that's what we want because we're getting rid of everything that doesn't come over in the distillate. So if anything, if there's any sugar left behind, we didn't get that alcohol value there, and it just gets thrown out with our byproduct. Yeah. Well, if you're making beer, you might want to use a yeast that leaves behind a little bit of sugar because you're going to be drinking the beer, you know, and that would just affect what would the ABV, alcohol by volume, of the beer be. So if I use a yeast that finishes off all the sugar, it might be 8% alcohol. If I use a one that has partial attenuation, then it's going to leave behind a little bit of sugar, give me a beer that's 5.7% alcohol. It's really more palatable. You know, I mean, it's all nice to get a Trappist ale. Oh my God, it's got 13% alcohol, but it's not really that fun to drink, you know?
Yeah. Right. Now, do I understand it ends up, because you distill it in making whiskey, that's why it ends up being a byproduct. If it's not making alcohol, then it's not coming out as something you want to keep. It goes out with
the cow feed. All the leftover water in the grain that's left behind after the distillate is removed, that is where the sugar would be if it didn't all get used up. So again, in beer making, you get the same number of glasses of beer no matter how the fermenter comes out.
Yeah.
With the exception of some carbon dioxide getting out.
Yeah. You said it goes out with the cow feed, and I know what you mean. You mean it gets used, repurposed essentially. This ends up as cow feed. Now that like sugar water, is there a way to repurpose that with that byproduct?
You mean with rum production?
Oh, I don't know.
Because bourbon is going to be made with all grains.
Yeah.
So when you distill out the alcohol, you have, when I say sugar, you have basically everything from starch to breakdown products of starch, which includes sugar, disaccharides of sugar, and you know, like glucose, maltose, for example. Those will be fermentable sugars.
Okay.
So you still have a lot of fiber, oil, protein, a lot of good. That's why what's called the stillage, which is the liquid left over after distillation, that's actually what you would recycle back to the front to your cook process if you're going to do a sour mash.
That makes perfect
we don't do a sour mash. So all of our stillage, all that liquid, we just give it to local farmers and they feed it to their cattle. That's what I meant.
Oh, cool. Cool. Yeah, that answered my question. I know that you've mentioned, well, in ways that I've heard you talk about different yeast strains, it sounds very situational. You know, depends what you want it for, with consuming all the sugars. I've heard you mention also, it depends, like you might want a more temperature tolerant yeast in certain times and everything too. So like talk a little bit about that, with different considerations as why you'd want this kind of yeast strain or that kind of yeast strain.
Yep. So again, number one, you're always going to want to make the best damn bottle of bourbon possible. I mean, you're not going to take a shave. I'll have 10% of the flavor gone if I can get it faster. It's like, no, you want 100%. We want to make sure we're aiming for the best shit ever on that for every time.
Yeah.
But some things, like 3 examples, you mentioned one of them, temperature tolerance. That's an attribute that might be handy, especially in the summertime when we're looking to, if we got to run chillers that cost us a bunch of money to keep our fermenters cool, we can use a yeast strain. It's just more sustainable. We really look to sustainability and innovation a lot at Wilderness Trail. And so, we definitely don't want to change the flavor of our whiskey, but we can run. I mean, a lot of distilleries shut down. They do their shutdowns in the summertime because their dynamics of fermentation change so much, whether it be more potential for bacteria or they just have a problem with their typical yeast strain finishing the job whenever the fermenter's at 102 degrees or 95 degrees, or they have to spend a bunch of money to keep it cool. So temperature tolerance is one thing. The length of time that it takes to finish the fermenter, that's another thing. If it takes me a week to finish a fermenter, then I have got to have 1 tank set aside for a whole week. We finish a fermenter in 2 days, then I can use the same tank 3.5 times in a week. So instead of buying 18 fermenters, we bought 6 fermenters. So that's another way that it saves you. And then another example would be the yield. How many proof gallons of alcohol are you getting per bushel of grain? Some yeast, like we didn't realize it till, we went from very small 500-gallon fermenters to 4,000-gallon fermenters to now 20,000-gallon fermenters. And now that we're up at 20,000-gallon fermenters, we see very clearly when I use strain A, I get 55 barrels of whiskey out of that fermenter. When I use strain B, I get 61 barrels of bourbon out of that fermenter. Whenever we were just getting 1 barrel per fermenter, I was like, man, I think we got a barrel and a quarter that time. We didn't see it till we got bigger fermenters, and we see it every time. So that's something that's established. We get better yields from certain yeast strains. So those are 3 good reasons outside of flavor of why we would switch to different yeast strains.
Yeah. And is that bigger yield primarily because of the attenuation? They're just higher attenuation?
Well, you're always going to want to use fully attenuated yeast. This is something that's kind of that we're in the process of studying. As scientists, sometimes, well, hopefully most of the time, you make an observation. So we switch strains, we see, holy crap, it makes more barrels. So that's the observation. Now, what is the test that I can run that test, what hypothesis do I want to draw from that? And so we could say attenuation. Well, the thing is, in that fermenter, as well as one that you get less barrels, the amount of sugar that's gone is the same. So how do you explain that? And then you just kind of got to move your hypothesis. Now, what we have learned about that particular strain that gives us more barrels is that one, it kicks in really fast. Like it starts bubbling faster and everything. So what we believe is it uses up the oxygen quicker at the beginning of the batch, and it goes into fermentative metabolism faster. So you have less time for oxygenative growth, which is what leads to reproduction. So now where did all that carbon go that would have doubled or tripled the yeast population? It went into making a bunch more whiskey. That's our hypothesis. Now we're kind of testing that to see if that's actually what's happening. But that's our best. It's kind of one of them things where, we don't even have to figure out why as long as it does it. But being the science guys of bourbon, we definitely want to figure it out.
I love it. Science. So I'm really curious. Like, this has kind of hit me as we're talking. How does one isolate a yeast strain? Like, what
are
is
you
a yeast
synthesizing?
strain?
Are you synthesizing them,
These
or are you just finding them in the wild?
Okay.
Yeah.
Like the organism that causes strep throat, it's a living organism. It's a bacteria that lives in your throat. If you breathe on somebody, that organism goes through the air and it hits them and it starts growing in their bodies, and that's how you transmitted it. Very similarly, if I have a fermenter that is full of yeast bubbling in there, I can take out a fragment of that and I can put that on a growth medium, and the yeast is going to start growing on there. And there's methods that we use as microbiologists to actually tease apart, hey, I just want the yeast. I don't want anything else in there. So, because there could be bacteria, there could be more than just the yeast that we put into there. You know, if we're fermenting in open top containers and, you know, wasp flies in there or something.
Yeah.
There's a couple other things in there with it. But, you know, that's how, you know, as a yeast company, when we first started Firm Solutions, the first dang thing we did outside of studying our competitors' strains, you know, competitors got a better strain than us. They're not going to have it for too much longer.
That's great.
We'll find a way to get a little bit of it. And that's the difficult thing about the yeast business. Like, how would you ever steal one of our strains? You go on a website and you order a pound of it. Bam, you have a strain. It's not like we got it under lock and key. So it's a natural organism. You can't prevent anybody from, you know, from doing it. But when we first started Firm Solutions, we went to like organic farmers markets, for example. We bought strawberries and cantaloupes and blueberries, and we just made all these little mashes. And then we fortified it with sugar, and just whichever one started bubbling and making something that smelled good, we'd know, okay, well, there's probably yeast in there. And then we'd culture the organism. And we do not only microbiology, but a good bit of molecular biology, where we're looking at DNA sequences to determine, okay, if we have something that looks like a yeast, is it Saccharomyces cerevisiae? That's the genus and the species of the yeast that we use to make alcohol, versus, you know, a Cluvaromyces or Candida or Pichia, or there's all kinds of other genera of yeast that might be useful for something else. Like maybe if you're making kombucha, you know, hey, I want something that gives me that acidity, but I can't have any alcohol in there.
Yeah. We'll have to bring up acetobacteria soon. But I have a really quick question. Is it basically like, you know, Canis familiaris and like breeds of dogs? Is it like kind of the same, the species?
That's genus and the species. Yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the different strains are different species?
Well, a strain is really just, I mean, a strain usually it has some type of identifier. Okay.
I gotcha.
As opposed to if I just go out in the environment and I say, hey, I'm going to find yeast in my front yard and in my backyard, I would say those are two isolates. Okay. Because I isolated those yeast from two, and I would take notes on where I got them from. But then upon closer examination, I find out that they're genetically identical. The one from my front yard must have got my backyard. So therefore, even though I isolated those two separately, I found out through working on it that they're actually the same strain.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to, hey, I stick both of these in a fermenter. One makes alcohol, one doesn't. That would be an identifier of, okay, well, those are two different strains.
That's
you know, and then I could maybe find maybe they're even different species. You know, so it's you don't know till you get into the work.
For sure.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of getting in and doing the work, how do you know if it's in the family of one that's going to make decent whiskey? How do you decide what to move forward with? How do you know that it's actually, without, you know, making whiskey and waiting 4 years, how do you know
like
that it's going to turn into something good?
Yeah. So we have some different screening techniques that we use in the laboratory. So one thing that is kind of generally accepted in, you know, if it makes a good beer, it'll make a good distillate. I mean, why the hell wouldn't it? You know, you know, you don't really got to wait 4 years. If it makes a god awful beer, you know, or you could make a great beer and screw up distillation, you know, bring it off the still at 109 proof or something and have your stillage waters in your distillate. You know, there's ways of screwing up distillation, but usually if you have a really great fermentation, so the first step we would do with a yeast strain that we know is at least the right species, we'll stick it in some malt like make a quick beer with it. Like just even some malt extract and a little bit of water, do like about a 9 or a 10 bricks mixture, put the strain of interest in there, and then maybe do a control like, hey, here's a beer strain and here's a distiller strain. And then let's look at them all tomorrow. Do they have a head on it? Is it even foaming at all? Then take some of the liquid out of there. How much alcohol was produced? Did it finish off all the sugar? What other things can we learn about it? Did it taste good? Did it smell good? That'd be the first step. And then we would move into making a distillate from it.
Nice. Earlier, you mentioned you were like, I could go out and find a yeast strain in my front yard, in my backyard. Have you ever distilled and barreled a whiskey that was like a yeast strain that was close to home for you? Like this is from my front yard.
Well, we don't jack around too much, with just, we do all kinds of cool stuff, but but what we have done as contract producers, we've done some pretty far out shit for other people. So
that's nice. Yeah, let's hear it.
We got to experience that and we got to learn from it, but we didn't necessarily have to take on the burden of doing it and seeing whether it was any good or not. And I will say that there's been some good ideas and there's been some really bad ideas.
Nice.
So,
do certain distillers come? Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I would love to hear how bad ideas have turned out.
If you have any specific examples. But additionally, I was wondering if, I know that you've worked for other people to develop yeast strains for certain applications and things like that. Specifically, has anyone ever come to you and been like, I want you to develop this for me? And you're like, I know this is going to suck, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Well, we're always ready to give the customer are you sure you want to do this type of talk? Because really, when you look at the fact that we have 10 different really great distiller strains that are available on the shelf every day of the year, fresh, that can be shipped to you within 2 business days anywhere in the continental United States, it really doesn't make sense to recreate the wheel. And even though, and why doesn't it make sense? Because it's not that easy to do. Okay. You can culture yeast from your front yard. I can do that for you. Our company can do that for you. And that might cost you a couple $1,000. So it's like, oh, that's not too bad. But now how are you going to get that yeast in a form are you going to grow it up yourself? Now you got to have a microbiology lab. And if we grow it up for you every time, it's way more expensive. And when we make yeast, the strains that we market, when we make 80 tons of dried yeast at a time. When
dried yeast.
That's the only way to make it to where it's economic and we can be competitive against the other companies. So normally somebody who's like, oh, I want this yeast isn't ready to commit to the smallest amount we can make is like 3,000 pounds.
Wow.
So that's way more. That would keep a craft distillery going for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So that's the other part of it. Is usually it doesn't work out. And a lot of times it's just about something that person wants to do, rather than something that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So we try to just be realistic and it's like, name me one bourbon brand that is the leader on the yeast marketing front. Outside of Wilderness Trail, of course.
4 Roses.
Well, and I would say that too, but that's not the only thing. You know what I mean? It's just
for sure. Yeah, that's not the big thing. Yeah.
Right. So again, it's kind of back to my point of like, it's not going to be the thing that, oh my God, that's their own. And a lot of times, to be quite honest, people that have their own yeast strain, like I was talking to one distillery who really makes a big deal out of having their own yeast strain. And I asked the scientists who were involved with capturing that yeast strain from the wild. Okay. They made yeast traps. They basically made like little mash things and they took them out to this area and then and then they brought them back to the lab. And I said, well, hey, whenever you made that mash and you took it out to the field, did you leave a bucket behind? And they're like, well, no. I said, because if you did, I'll bet the same damn yeast that was growing in your field bucket was growing in the one. I'll bet you never killed all the yeast that was in that grain that you used. Because, man, we've done that a million times. You cannot, I mean, we can run mash through a sterilizer, and it is like different than any substrate on earth in terms of killing shit. And it is like impossible. And there's a lot of, I mean, why are yeast the ones that are involved with fermenting grain-based spirits when yeast has only been discovered for a couple hundred years? We've been making distillates. China's been known to make distillates for 10,000 years.
Yeah.
So we didn't even know that.
Let alone bread, you know?
Yeah.
So do you ever get, when with Firm Solutions, did you ever get a customer that was like, we want to get this proprietary strain from you that you can't sell to anyone else?
Yeah. Yeah, we've got several customers that are like that. And in that case, that's their strain. You know, we're not going to, you know, and in some cases it's, hey, we're going to label it for you for this use. We can use that strain to someone in a whole nother, you know, like fuel ethanol strain plant could use it, you know, since that's got nothing to do with whiskey, for example.
Yeah. So let's talk Wilderness Trail. And we'll probably skip around to, you know, fermentation related questions, but why?
Wait, first off.
Okay, please.
First off, I'm dying. Year after year, I get the Wilderness Trail emails and I see emails about the chili cook-off. Do you ever enter the chili cook-off? What is your secret recipe?
Well, I have never entered the chili cook-off, just to be fair to the other contestants, you know.
Because you would win as a scientist.
That's right, I would. You know, my chili is pretty like normal chili. You know, I don't do anything real crazy. A lot of the chilies that are made there, you know, I would even, you know, venture to guess if they're really chili or not. We actually had a group.
Oh, really?
First year we ever did the Chili Fest. There was actually a group that was like, hey, are we using like U.S. chili rolls? You know, and it was like, because you can't have beans, no noodles. You can't. I was like, you can't have beans? It's like,
what is it?
So the next year we just kind of opened it up a little bit of, hey, you know, and then, man, we had people making seafood chowder and freaking deep fried Oreos and all kinds of stuff.
That's awesome.
So, that's great. I could be more help to you there.
I would have assumed like you had like a method if you did.
Well, I do put Bloody Mary mix in place of tomato juice, and I put a little bit of
secrets
in there too.
The secrets come out.
I'm going to take that down. So when you were at Firm Solutions for a good few years, probably at least 6 years, before you and Shane were like, let's make some whiskey ourselves. What was that transition like?
Yeah. So, you know, as yeast providers, and I've said this a million times, but as yeast providers, what we learned very early on is the yeast gets to blame for every problem that distillery or brewery has. And so we're constantly engaging with our clients on helping them figure out what's going on. And this is normally after the master distiller has spent 2 or 3 weeks trying to figure it out, or the plant manager or whoever it is. And then they call us up, man, we cannot figure out what the hell's going on here. So we get to engage in some really high level issues that are, you know, that other people would have had shot at that didn't get, you know, that weren't able to fix it. So we learn a hell of a lot. I mean, you don't get the corn or bourbons made out of 51% corn and goes into new charred oak barrels whenever you go into a distillery to fix their problem. It's like, hey, I need to get under that damn piece of equipment. I need to see how that, you know, agitator's wired into there. You know, or at least that's what Shane would be doing because he's an engineer. I would be looking more into the mash, looking at the biochemistry and the microbiology. Shane and our engineering team would be looking at, you know, piping, low point drains and places where cleaning isn't getting done properly, et cetera, et cetera. And so we just learned a hell of a lot. And I mean, I've talked to 7 different distilleries just today on different issues, and you know, it's just the way it is every day. So decades of that, you just to get exposure to everything, every damn type. I mean, when just looking at whiskeys, you know, Scotch, Irish whiskeys, Canadian whiskeys, bourbon, rye whiskeys, American single malts, get over into beer and hard seltzer and rum and tequila and kombucha, and I mean, and then get over into sauerkraut and all this other shit. And
sourdough.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the majority of our time is spent in the alcohol industry, but we still have a lot of ancillary, you know, other things that give us just a wide depth of knowledge. So at some point in time, we just were kind of like, it just hit us like, holy shit, we probably know more than any humans that have ever existed in terms of collectively, because they just don't let you go in from one distillery to the next.
Yeah.
So we were very fortunate to be able to kind of get in that way. And so we started our distillery. I mean, you know, there's different kind of origin stories. You know, I mean, Shane, his family's been in the business a while, so I know he had a kind of a want to get into it for that reason. But, you know, we have always been educators. You know, I'm a faculty at Moonshine University and have been for almost 10 years. I'm an adjunct professor at the James Beam Institute at the University of Kentucky. So we've always been educators. So we started the distillery kind of thinking, you know, this will be really great for our clients because we'll be able to show them how to make vodka, rum, bourbon, rye whiskeys. And just because we're the biggest bourbon fans on the planet, we'll have our own damn distillery. So it'll, you know, serve two purposes at once. And that's just how it started. We really didn't realize at what was happening at that time. I mean, 2012 was a damn good time to start a distillery.
Yeah.
You know? So you just wouldn't have known it at that time. And we were like the first of, I think, 6 or 7 distilleries on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail Craft Tour. And I think there's almost 50 now.
Oh,
there was only 9 heritage members. We became the 18th member of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
this was, you know, 10 years ago, or I guess 11 years ago now. Now, I know, so I mentioned earlier, I've got the 6-year releases. I've got the wheat and the rye. I've got the 8-year releases, wheat and rye. I know that you did a 10-year wheated release last December. How did that go? Is there any plans for wider distribution on that? Also, I can't believe I didn't ask for a sample of that in doing this, because that's like I didn't even think about it. But yeah, the 10-year. Tell me about it. Was it good? And also, that was barrel number 2, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
Wow.
What's going on with barrel number 1? I would like.
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's still there. It's still there.
Yeah.
You know,
is it maturing well?
Oh yeah, it tastes great. I had
it.
some people in there, some people that I would, you know, hold in pretty high regard as far as taste. And one guy said that our first barrel was the best wilderness he'd ever tasted.
Wow.
So, you know, and when you go back and and actually that day I had about 10 or 15 different media people with me, and there were a lot of good friends. So it was a really good occasion to kind of get in there and show what we had. But the whole point of it was, you know, guys, this isn't a barrel that our people like painstakingly went through our warehouses and found and then laid out for me to get, you know.
That's a good point.
This is the first barrel we ever made. So, you know, most distilleries don't even have a successful startup on the first day.
It's true.
So,
Totally.
You know, much less actually produce a barrel. So it wasn't like I picked the best barrel we ever made, you know.
Yeah.
But it was damn good. And my point was, you can go to about any barrel in our warehouses, minus there are a couple we did fuck up a couple times.
Nice. Of course.
But I can tell you the dates when that was and what happened and how we solved that problem immediately.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's one thing about Wilderness is we're just very consistent. I think if you could put a word, you know, consistent, reliable, you know, those are some words that I frequently use because as a whiskey enthusiast, I know the pain of, man, I tried some whiskey the other day. I loved it. And now I want to get a bottle to share with my friends. And it's totally different. It's aggravating as hell. I mean, is a lack of consistency. And and there's lack of reliability, I think. And I think, that's one thing I really like about Wilderness. If I do a tasting, I did one last week up here in DC, and I just stopped at the liquor store around the corner from my house. I grabbed 3 bottles. I knew they were going to be killer. There wasn't no doubt about it. Because we just got that type of consistency.
Yeah. Speaking of consistency, though, I had this. We were talking about yeast a bunch earlier, so to dip back into a little bit of that, do yeast strains like evolve over time? Do you have like a golden preserved strain from 11 years ago that you have to dip
like a
back
seed
into
bank kind
in
of
order
thing?
to maintain consistency, or how does that work?
So when we isolate yeast, okay, at the moment we isolate, which it's a couple day process, we grow it up, do a couple cereal passages from one plate to the next to make sure that it's pure culture. But at that point we make a stock, basically like a mother culture, and we put that in the freezer and store that at minus 80 degrees Celsius in a 10% glycerol solution. And that yeast can stay in there for decades. So every time we make one of those huge batches of yeast, we're going to go back to that original mother culture to get. Now, if I took that and I just grew it in a flask and then I transferred a little bit to a new flask tomorrow and just kept doing that every day, which is what some of the distilleries do. It's well known that some of the distilleries just keep perpetuating their own yeast. And for sure, over time, those yeast are changing. So definitely, I mean, that's something that it's well known to occur. But we mitigate that by going back to those mother cultures.
That's
whenever
sweet.
we make batches of yeast.
Yep. I had no idea that would be a thing, but also at the same time, I had no doubt that the sciencey people would have, banked the original so that they can dip back into it regularly. It makes too much sense.
Yeah. So if I was to go to a distillery that was doing that 10 years ago, and my beard just happened to dip down in that fermenter just a little bit, and I happened to go to the bathroom, take a plate,
that's why the beard,
a little bit on there, and then go back 10 years later, and dang, my beard went back in there again, and then go back to the plate. See, if I studied those 2 different yeast strains, it would be very different. We've actually done that experiment a few times.
With the beard?
With the beard.
This is not only a beard, it's a beard in some cases, but in some cases it's a yeast inoculation.
Oops.
Sorry.
Perfect.
Yeah. So one thing I love about Wilderness Trail, and I bought this bottle about a month ago, and I am not one to drink a lot. I've shared a lot of this, but I've drank a lot of it too. This is the wheated single barrel at cask strength. And I love Wilderness Trail from the start. There is a defining note, and it's not only me that believes this note, or even just this quality of Wilderness Trail whiskey. It is soft. It is one of my first notes I got on the first bottle I ever tried of Wilderness Trail. It was a wheated bourbon. Was like soft strawberry syrup, really nice and sweet, but in a very I can't even get around the word, but soft way. So I know that Wilderness Trail applies, of course, different yeast strains that are probably proprietary to Wilderness Trail alone, but I know you also apply a sweet mash proprietary process. Do you think that it's both that's causing that soft, sweet note, or do you think it's one or the other, or something else?
Well, definitely. I mean, the yeast strains are going to react to their environment. So there's a lot that our yeast are doing for us based on the process we're running. But 2 things that I think trump out the yeast. The yeast is certainly important for sure. But 2 things, and maybe even I'll throw in a third one, that really make a difference in the mouthfeel of our products and how it is, how your taste buds interpret it. One of those is our cook process. We cook at a lower temperature than any other distillery on the whole Kentucky Bourbon Trail. So that's one thing that we believe is a little bit more of a softer. I mean, you said the word soft, and we say softer cooking method because we're not boiling the hell out of our grains, essentially.
Yeah.
And what happens, I mean, we really did it more initially to save energy, because when we looked at, hey, you have to heat the mash at the beginning to convert the starch into fermentable sugars. But we wanted to know, like, well, what temperature does that have to be? Because that's a big, important decision we got to make, because that's pinned on a lot of the utilities we're going to be spending. So if I can cook at 185, which is what we cook at, why the heck do I want to cook at 211, which is what almost everybody else cooks at?
Yeah, full boil.
So that's one thing that really, really makes a difference in the chemical profile of our fermentations. And what happens when you cook the mash at a lower temperature is you keep the proteins together. There's a lot of protein, and we use more middle grains than a lot of other distilleries. So most other distilleries are in the 70s on corn. For example, we're in the 60, we're 64 corn, 24% of wheat or rye, and then 12% malted barley. So we've got a lot of protein in there. So we don't want to cook at a super high temperature, because if we break apart that protein, you release amino acids that can become things that are kind of, not as we call them congeners, basically.
Yeah.
So, ethyl carbamate is one chemical. EC is what it's referred to. And that's actually regulated in liquor going to the European Union. So it's important. It's like a class B carcinogen, and it's also a regulated. So that's just one example of, that's another reason why we wouldn't want to cook our grains at such a high temperature. We want to limit the amount of that production. So, those are some things the next thing is the sweet mash process. For sure, the dynamics of the sweet mash, we're fermenting at a higher pH because we're not acidifying our mash with liquid from a previous distillation. Okay. Yeah. So by running our mash at a higher pH, our distillate actually comes out at a little bit higher pH. And for that reason, I think that's why Wilderness Trail goes down so damn smooth at 100 proof, which is our standard bottle and bond offering, as well as at cask strength, which what's the strength of the one you got there?
113.6.
Yeah, 113.6. So we're going in at 110, typically coming out, between 111 to 118. I've seen some of them over 120. I've seen single barrels of our rye, because we did go in some of those at 100. I've seen it cask strength below 100 before.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's neat. So now, why doesn't every distillery cook at a lower temperature?
Well, whenever you start something a long time ago, maybe it's because Grandpa didn't have a glass thermometer in his pocket when he's running against getting chased by the law through the woods, but, and so therefore, maybe was using bubbling as an indicator of like, okay, I'll get it to a boil, and then I let it drop, for example, and then you have a distillery years later and you're like, man, we got to write that damn recipe down. Well, he brought it to a boil, let it start bubbling, and then you get the temperature of it and you just write it down. You just do that and you never ask any questions, because some of these distilleries were started prior to us having a good understanding of the whole saccharification and conversion process and how enzymes were involved. Now we use commercial enzymes to a large extent. Back in the old days, you're relying 100% on the malt. With bourbons, we've got 8 to 15% malt. With Scotch and Irish whiskeys, they're 100% malt. Beer is 100% malt. So you got all these different dynamics of enzymes and biochemistry involved as well.
Yeah. We started talking about the releases. Let's definitely mention. So the core releases from Wilderness Trail, you've got the high rye bottled and bond bourbon. You've got the wheated bottled and bond bourbon. and you've got the rye. Also bottled in bond, right?
Yep, all three.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, first off, well, I'd love for you to, just tell us about the core offering, but I'm also on a deeper level curious how you landed on 24% as the secondary grain value.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll have to give Shane a little bit of extra credit on that one. I know when we were looking at mash recipes, I mean, when you have your own distillery, you have the opportunity of making your own favorite recipe.
Uh-huh.
So we both have always been big fans of wheaters, so that's very important.
Nice.
Shane's grandmother and his grandfather actually worked at Stitzel-Weller Distillery.
Oh, wow.
And,
That's legit.
back when were making Old Fitzgerald and Weller and
A lot of
Rebel
wheaters.
Yell and different things. And those are some very famous old wheated bourbons. And, we just kind of looked through, we had some old archival material that we looked through and different things. And also just kind of want to differentiate ourselves from other bourbon producers in the state that use higher amount of corn. And we're big believers that a lot of that flavors in those middle grains.
Yeah.
So we wanted to really showcase those middle grains and cut the amount of corn down.
Yeah, big differentiator too. Yeah. And then so you've got the core line, but you also do single barrels of the core line. Or actually, wait, Cole and I were having a minor argument earlier. Are the bottled in bond 100 proof? Are they small batch or are they each single barrels?
Well, all bottled in bond is 100 proof, but the wheated actually started off as single barrel bottled in bond. So
that's what it is then.
And I live in DC in addition to Kentucky. And man, I'm telling you what, every day I just hit 3 new stores and I'm on the hunt for those old Wilderness Trail. You can still find them. I mean, I hit up a store in Maryland last week and they had a whole shelf full of the original 6-year. In the original bottles. It was like had must all over it, where they must have ordered 10 cases of it or something. And so you can still find those old wheated, the yellow labeled bottled in bond single barrels out there. If you look, you'll say
that was episode 147 was it wasn't bottled in bond. But go on.
Yeah, well, if it had a proof on it other than 100, it would have been a single barrel.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, because that core offering, the bottled in bonds, they're all 100 proof. And when you get into the single barrel territory, then the barrel picks, those are all bottled at cask strength, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And that is for the high rye, the 24% rye, the 24% wheat, and the rye whiskey. Those single barrels exist for all those as well. And I do I tend to favor the single barrels. I've got my collection 3 and 3 here over my shoulders. A little bit in the sunlight over there. I need to do something about that. But the single barrel rye, I've got this one now. I don't know how truly special this is, but it was very special to me going out of my way. So it is. So the guy who picked it, I think his name is One Man Wolf Pack.
Oh, okay.
But if I understood correctly, at the time that this was released, it was the oldest single barrel rye to date, and it was a 7-year.
Oh wow.
2-month single barrel rye at 112.23 proof.
That's the first 7-year barrel pick I've ever seen.
That's what I thought it was. So I was very, very excited to try this single barrel alongside the bottled in bond 17-year that you guys sent to me because I love this single barrel. So, and I did, Cole also has in his hands a little sample of the 7-year cask strength as well.
That's what I was entry buzzing on.
Oh, good.
Delicious.
I know. So yeah, let's go ahead and pour a little bit of this.
Yeah.
Our rye whiskey is I mean, I love our bourbons and, we're known for bourbons. We're in Kentucky, but our rye whiskey, it just is amazing. And there's several reasons for that, One of those is that, I mean, when we started making the stuff, we knew that we were going to release a bottle in bond first. So that meant that we would have had to have our own juice that was at least 4 years old. That's right.
Yeah.
So knowing that we were going to release something at 100 proof, we didn't want to be coming out of the barrel at 136.
For sure.
So, you know, we went into the barrel at 110. Again, the one you got there is 111, 112. So you don't have to dilute it much to get down to 100 proof. And when you consider the other ryes that are kind of the staple ryes out there, a lot of those come out of the barrel in the 130s and they're diluted to 80 or 90, you know? So that's not to even mention the sweet mash and the lower cook temperatures. We get a lot of, at least that 7-year would have been rye that would have been grown in the county that our distillery's in. So
nice.
You know, back in the, you know, when we started Wilderness Trail, we were only grinding 820 pounds of grain a day. We do about 1 million pounds every 5 days now. So we were able to get all of our grain from a single farm almost in Boyle County. And then little by little, our geographic footprint has expanded, but it's well known we try to get our grains from as local as possible.
Nice.
Speaking of as local as possible, what was it, a year or two ago, Campari bought like 70% of Wilderness Trail. Am I wrong about the 70%?
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. So far as I've seen, Wilderness Trail is still good.
Chugging right along like nothing ever happened.
Chugging right along. Yeah. And has anything changed?
Ownership.
Yeah.
That's one thing. You know, Shane and I, you know, we not to get too deep in the weeds on it or anything, but you know, we were actually kind of going global at that time. And, you know, Campari is well known to be a global organization already. So, you know, it was just kind of a next logical step for us. I mean, this thing, you know, we started off in a 1 barrel a day operation 10 years ago. Wow. Did we know that this was going to be the 14th largest bourbon producer in the world within 8 or 9 years? Awesome. You know, it's just things develop. But yeah, that went down and we've had a great relationship. And, you know, we do a lot of, you know, there's a lot of synergies that we have between the two companies. Cool. So, yeah, been a good partnership.
But yeah, that's cool.
Have any
it's nice
doors
to see that things are still good?
Yeah. Have any doors been open to you now? Now that you're part of a larger organization here, are there any larger opportunities for Wilderness Trail now?
Well, anytime you go from 2 salespeople to 1,000, you know, that can't be a bad thing. So that's probably one door that's opened. But, you know, I think it's just about the outreach, you know, I mean, how many feet on the street, you know, a couple, I mean, 5 years ago, if it wasn't me or Shane or Haley or, you know, Jarrett, we've had a few key players kind of running around for the last few years. And now, like I said, we've got hundreds of people. I mean, we've even got people chilling out in the background, you know, you never know.
Right. Sitting in a New York City office, just hanging out, just listening.
That's right.
Yeah. So you live in DC as well as Danville, I guess?
Yep.
That's cool. I'm in Richmond myself.
Not
too far from you. I'm actually going up to DC this weekend.
Yeah,
that's funny. What brought you up to Danville, first of all, and then
DC?
What brought you up to DC?
So Danville Shane was already living in Danville, and I was a professor in far eastern Kentucky, and I'm really more from over in the Danville area. And cool. so Shane didn't have to move again. We just you know, Danville actually made a lot of sense for us for many reasons for Firm Solutions. In terms of freight and all that kind of stuff, how that works, shipping and different things. Louisville has a huge UPS hub there, and so Kentucky is actually a great place to do business. And so Danville worked out great, and then Danville ended up being a great place for Wilderness Trail as well. Cool. DC, my wife is a little bit more city than me, and we just kind of you know, agreed that, hey, let's have a city place and a country place. And so we got our country place in Kentucky, and then we bought a place here in DC. We looked at, you know, New York City and Louisville, Kentucky just wasn't far enough away. Spent a good bit of time in Louisville anyhow. My oldest daughter lives there.
Oh, cool.
But DC is a great market for us, always has been. Actually, we came into DC, and Maryland, I think, was the second market we hit after Kentucky. So and that's why you can find a lot of killer bottles from the beginning up here. if you look around. So that's another reason I moved here, is just to get all the good Wilderness Trail Dusties that once they're all up the stuff, I'm packing up and finding the next state that's got them.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Romping around DC, does anybody ever recognize you? Do people, are they like, hey, are you Dr. Pat Heist?
I'll get it every now and then. I
That's
try to
cool.
remain anonymous, but it's hard to, especially at the at Jack Rose at the bourbon bar.
Oh,
there.
for sure.
I'm sitting down at the end, trying to.
That guy's got a long beard. He must be Dr. Pat Heist.
Yeah. You got to roll the beard up and tie it down somehow.
Or dip it in the whiskey.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. That's great.
That's funny.
I've actually been to Danville. I visited a friend at Center College one time and enjoyed the scenery while I was there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful town. We've really, and man, I mean, what a great place it's been for us, not only for our Firm Solutions business, but for, with Wilderness Trail. And also over the years, as Wilderness Trail has grown, seeing the, bourbon themed restaurants and, a few hotels popping up, and there's a lot of Airbnbs that are, bourbon themed and things. It's really great. We get the Bourbon Chase, that big race they do in Kentucky, comes through Danville now. So a lot of big advantages for us as well as the county.
Nice.
This whiskey is phenomenal.
I know. I was like, we got to talk about the whiskey.
Yeah.
So actually, first off, shout out to Kara who helped us set all this up, and shout out to everybody involved in this. I'm sure Wilderness Trail people helped out too, but got me this sweet Glencairn here too.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, Pat's got one too.
Yeah.
Beautiful branded Wilderness Trail Glencairn. But so I'm getting just mega cherries on the nose, on the palate. It is just, and now again, to be clear, what we're drinking is this 7-year impossible to find now, bottled in Bond Rye. Was I correct? Is it distillery only? Was it distillery only?
Largely. I've seen it in a couple other spots, but it is largely distillery only.
Yeah. Listener, don't expect to find one yet, but I assume in future years.
It was there at the distillery the other day when I was there.
Oh, really?
Might
as well drive to Danville tonight.
Yeah, I know, right? Jeez.
Get there before Christmas hits.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, huge cherries for me though. Just unbelievable fruit. And I did sip a little bit of the cast strength rye, the 7-year, 2-month single barrel. It's got a little bit of that, but it's more of a undertone. It's more of a back note that you got to wait to get until into the finish. Good. And to me, it's the single barrel ended up with much more funky tobacco stuff going on that hits you right away. And then as that fades away, that layer peels away and the red fruit is underneath that. But at the 100 proof, man, it is red fruit for days for me.
Well, kind of like what you guys were saying about, putting a drop of water, a little bit of ice in there, whenever you go from a cask strength, which, again, any of our cask strength are going to be single barrel. So there's not any, blending or any kind of commingling with other barrels. So that kind of a standalone, thing of its own. But that little bit of a dilution to get it from 111 or whatever down to 100 also, helps kind of, well, in some ways it takes away, as you kind of saw with that, your comment about the single barrel there, having that, a little extra, that probably was wiped away by that little bit of a dilution. So, and then you just keep peeling back layers. Typically whenever we're testing distillate, we're going to be proofing it down to 40 proof. So whenever we're testing distillate off the still, we take it all the way down to 40, and that spreads everything out enough to where you really only taste the impurities, if there's any.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. We standardize it always at 80 proof.
40 proof.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, 40 proof.
Yeah.
Wow.
Low.
Interesting.
Yeah, 80 proof, that'd still be bottle strength.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
For one of the things I've noticed, and you guys are just over 10 years old as a distillery, but your minimum product was 4 years, which I give you mad props for waiting that long before producing a single bottle. And I'm sure that was hard, but we're
not
seeing
the best business decision.
No, I believe it, but it's paid off, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But we talked about a 10-year. We talked about that kind of stuff. This stuff keeps getting better and better and better. And, of course, in your first few years, it was like, how would you say, a barrel a day or whatever?
Yep.
Or at least in their first year.
Only 3 or 4 days a week as well.
Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm. And so like, barrel number 1 is like what, 12, 13 years now at this point.
11.
But okay, yeah, 11 years. But like one of these days, Wilderness Trail is going to have a lot of 10 years out there. Are you feeling like putting out a lot of 10 years in 3 or 4 years?
Oh yeah, we feel like it. It's just, when you look at the 10-year that we just put out, that was the one of 2 barrels, maybe 3 barrels of 10-year we had total on our entire campus. And then, as Bryan mentioned, that was the entire contents of barrel number 2 that we made.
Yeah.
So there just wasn't much. I think there was only 130 bottles total in that barrel. So it wasn't much left.
Yeah.
Now, we definitely have a good plan. I mean, when you start a distillery, that was something that you don't really know until you get there. Every year that goes by, you're like, hey, man, what is going to be our sweet spot? Some master distillers, they say that 8 years, you can't beat that for a Kentucky bourbon. But, as good as our stuff was at 4 years or is at
100%.
5.5 years old, it was like, golly, man, is it going to is it going to be that much better at 7 or 8 years? And golly, I mean, the reason why we put out that 6 year is because it really was that much different than the typical 4.5, bottle and bond that we normally put out. So that 6 year, then we get to the 7-year rye. I mean, it turned another corner. The 8-year weeded bourbon and the 8-year high rye bourbon that we put out, it turned a corner. And then again, at 10-year, it turned that corner. And now that we're into more barrels, it's like, holy shit, man, I cannot wait to see what our weeded's going to taste like at 12 years. And we're just right around the corner from that. And then little by little, as we get into, 10 years, we got 3 barrels of it. Well, next year we got, we get into where we made 200 barrels the first year. Then we made 300 the second year. Well, 2 or 3 years into that, we started laying back 7,000, 10,000, 20,000 barrels. Now you get into those years, and then that's where you're going to start seeing some major Wilderness Trail popping.
I'm excited.
Cannot wait.
Statements. And we've actually had to hold back a lot of our, I mean, at one time we were really, there was more people that wanted Wilderness than we were willing to let go of bottles. Because you can sell everything. I mean, and working with hundreds of distilleries, there are some distilleries that have been operating for 15 years and they still don't have anything older than a 2 to 4 years because they just keep selling everything off,
Yeah.
They have to.
Totally.
That's commendable that you guys are pushing it in terms of age statements and like I could see one day maybe in 10 years you guys put out like a 15-17-year-old bourbon and it's gonna be the funny thing is like I say like it gets better and better. Your 4-year 5-year product is still one of the best, if not like I would argue top 5 type of 4-year 5-year bourbon out there, or let alone rye.
Such an easy recommendation. When somebody asks me for a recommendation because they're looking for something unique and it's decently priced, like Wilderness Trail is top 3 easily, if not just number 1 of it's so easy to recommend because
in terms of craft whiskey.
Totally. The flavor, the deliciousness per dollar is just top tier.
Well, and I saying that.
I mean, I got this single barrel like $60 the other day, and it's done. Like that's how much is left.
Yeah, that was only 3 days ago.
Yeah, exactly.
I did an event. I did an event over in Baltimore a couple 2 or 3 weeks ago, and same damn thing. They had 3 barrel picks. It was a weeded, high rye bourbon and rye whiskey. And sure enough, here I come clanking home with 3 6-packs whenever I got home. I just couldn't let it go. It's like, man, that's the only barrel that there's ever going to be.
100%.
If I connect with people on a bottle, I'm like anybody else. I mean, I'm going to want to get that, want to get a couple to drink, a couple of backups, and then a couple maybe to give to.
Yeah, exactly. If somebody asks me for one, I don't want to have to say no.
Yeah.
That's awesome. No, you guys are doing great stuff. I've never had even close to a mediocre whiskey from Wilderness Trail.
Yeah, easily. Mm-hmm. We got a couple write-ins. So we got a question here from buddy Benny J here. He noticed, and I noticed too, that there's not a lot of finishing going on, not a lot of finishing barrels. I did see and I want to talk to you about Cooper the distillery cat, obviously. But there was a rye whiskey. The Cooper rye was something else. There was a rye whiskey that was finished in a maple barrel, and then you all said the maple syrup finished in the rye barrel, I think.
Yep.
But so I've seen the maple finished rye. Have you ever played with any other finishes? Do you have any desires to play with any other finishes?
So, we definitely want to do that. We have, I would guess that by now we have some things probably in the works. But it's really been important for us especially as scientists, to really understand our spirit before we go putting it in a finish. A lot of, whenever we started seeing people doing it, and again, we're involved in the industry in many, many ways. I mean, we store a lot of barrels for other brands. We see things, kind of come in, go, and when we first started seeing people doing finishing, it was like, oh man, I bought 300 barrels of this 10-year-old, and I just got googly eyed when I heard it was 10-year-old, and they didn't realize it. Well, the reason they were selling it in the midst of the bourbon boom is because it wasn't worth a damn.
Exactly.
And then you see them, well, golly, what do I do with it? Shit, I don't know, man. Put it in a sherry cask or put it in
exactly.
That's what So let's see. Am I locking up here on you?
No, we got you.
Too big a deal. We can hear you at least.
So anyway, we started seeing people putting it in finishing barrels to try to cover up some flaw. And so in our minds, it was always like, well, God, our goal is to make the best whiskey ever. What the hell would we want to put it in a barrel for? Yeah. And now it's kind of a thing, and when you look at there are some distilleries that are just going completely overboard on finishes. It's just like every finish. It's like, it's almost like a ploy just simply to sell bottles than something that makes any sense. Or that you could keep track of. So we just want to be very mindful that when we do something, we're doing it for a very meaningful purpose and not just doing it to do it. What am I trying to get out of this? And then in the maple syrup barrel was an example of we just did it. It just seemed like a cool ass idea. That was we have a customer in, I think it was Vermont or Massachusetts. Maybe the maple syrup came from Vermont, but the customer was in Massachusetts, and we did finished put maple syrup in a freshly dumped rye barrel, and then filled that back up with rye once the maple syrup was out of it. And man, I'll tell you what, that was a delicious. Nice. I've seen those going for secondary market $500-$600.
Wow.
Easy. Yeah,
that's crazy.
I'd probably give that, actually, to be honest with you.
Dang it. That's not what I wanted to hear, because I actually passed on it for about like 180-ish. I was like, I love Wilderness Trail, but I'm not willing to give you, scumbag, $180 for a maple finish whiskey.
It's so good. And it didn't taste like maple syrup at all. It just had a little bit of that influence. I mean, what a great, going back in history, I will have to give a shout out to Macaulay Minton, who was our, he was behind that project. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Dang it. I knew I should have done it.
If you guys ever make it to Kentucky, come by my house and I will pour you
Well, I tell you what,
sold.
I travel to DC for work every now and then, and Cole lives, close by. We
2 hours from DC.
Yeah. So anyway, we might
I'll have
hit you
to
up next time.
Bottle that up here. I don't have any here in DC, but I'll get them.
Okay, sounds good.
That's great. So tell us about Cooper. The
So
distillery.
Cooper, the distillery cat,
Uh-huh.
that was definitely Shane and his wife Melissa. They rescued Cooper from the local wherever
Nice.
the cats get rescued from.
Uh-huh.
And you know, Cooper spent a lot of time with their dog, and I think initially thought it was a dog. It behaved like a dog. It would fetch.
the
and all
best
kinds of
cats.
Oh,
things.
nice.
Strange
Yeah.
cat. And there was one day, and the cat did not catch mice. I mean, we really had a plan that, hey, we'll keep it in the house there and it won't catch mice. And the cat didn't have a clue. And so one day I was in my office, and since the cat didn't catch mice, I had 2 or 3 mouse traps set in my office, and I'm sitting here doing work, and I hear this trap snap.
Oh, no.
It was literally like under my desk. So I reached under there and pull this mouse out. It was still warm and everything, and it was definitely dead. But the cat was there, and so I just started kind of doing this with the mouse, and then the cat just, as all of a sudden it realized that
I'm a
I know
cat.
what I'm supposed to do here.
These are fun.
Yeah, so it grabbed that mouse, and then it was like, you know, kind of freaking out. And the next day or the next couple days, he brought a mouse into me.
Oh,
nice.
whether
He's
he
like,
knew
this
it or
dude
not.
loves mice. I'm gonna bring him
this
mice.
guy's
Yeah,
into
he
mouse or
loves
mice.
That's right.
That's funny.
Oh, that's great.
No, that's
But
great.
he's a good cat. He's been our mascot. People love seeing. I mean, if you want to sell a bottle of whiskey, put a sticker or Cooper on the side of it.
Mhm.
That's
So
great.
there was some release that Wilderness Trail did maybe 1 to 2 years ago where it was through some, I want to say, subscription service or something. I'm blanking on the real memory here, but I think it was like a 7-year rye. It was a high age statement rye, and it was called the Cooper's Select or the Cooper
Nice.
something. And it had the imagery of the guy rolling the barrel on it. And I almost subscribed to this monthly whiskey thing just so I could get that bottle. But
That
fortunately,
might have been the Filson museum or something like that.
I'm not sure. But anyway, I somehow talked myself out of it. It was at the peak of my like, I'll buy anything right now phase.
I think that's the same sticker that was on our maple syrup finished bottle.
That sounds very familiar. Yeah, I know. So
funny.
Cooper is not your only distillery cat. Is that correct?
Well, Cooper is the only official distillery cat.
Nice.
We do have a couple barn cats around there.
Yeah,
Cooper
that's
found
right.
that out one night when we accidentally left him out, or he wandered off, and we left him out, and he came wandering into the distillery about 2:00 in the morning and had the hell beat out of him.
Oh, no. I thought he brought a lady home or something like that. But
Well,
no,
might have
different
started
story.
off that way, but he ended up getting slapped around.
Oh, no.
It happens.
Yeah,
It happens.
Yeah.
We do a lot of things with the Boyle County Humane Society and have had some different initiatives.
Nice.
We sponsor the spay and neuter program for, like, they catch cats and they spay and neuter them, then release them back to where they found them and stuff. And we've made a big impact on the local,
That's awesome.
cat situation there.
Nice,
cool.
nice. While we're talking about random stuff at the distillery, I meant to ask earlier with the concert and the fulcrum and everything. Have you guys ever played at the distillery? Have you done a concert at the distillery?
Yeah, absolutely. Now Fulcrum is a thing of the past, but I play in a band currently called Zella May. If you look it up, Zella May, ZELLA MAY with an exclamation point after it.
Nice.
Hell yeah.
And you can find it. And there's been, live footage of our band. We got a Facebook page and some other. We're old people, so of course we got a Facebook page. But we played the Kentucky State Barbecue Festival at the distillery.
Nice.
In like 2019. Our band played the American Craft Distillers Association meeting a couple years ago in Louisville. We played Hillbilly Days Festival in April. We're pretty active, and we play 4 or 5 shows a year at least.
That's awesome.
So when you were with Fulcrum, what kind of songs were you covering when you did cover songs? Like what kind of
same ones we do now, which is like Stone Temple Pilots.
Oh, my man.
Sweet Spot.
Oh, that's great.
Creed.
Oh yeah,
Shane
quality
in
90s
Zellerman?
goodies.
So
Shane
Shane,
and
he has dedicated his life these days to pro fishing. And
Nice.
he actually sent me some mega pictures of some wahoo that he got into just this morning.
That's great.
So
Nice.
while I'm over here arguing with the drummer about, get your shit put up, Shane's down to get the fish.
That's
Nice.
funny. Hey,
Okay,
cool,
cool.
when you get some dough from Campari, you get a little more time for fishing and stuff like that. And
you
being in a band, I'm sure.
You still vocals?
Yeah. Yep.
That's
still
great.
lead vocals.
Nice,
Yep.
awesome.
Totally
Do you
gonna
ever
check it out.
get into anything else? Do you ever keyboard, guitar, anything else?
I do play guitar, and I'm a collector of guitars. My
Nice.
wife, she's like wondering whenever I'm going to actually play them.
That's great.
I've actually picked a new guitar up within the last couple weeks, or actually within the last couple months. I got a really nice Les Paul.
Nice.
A Les Paul Les Paul standard from like 1981 or something. It's pretty sweet.
Awesome.
So I got a really good question for you. And there is a right answer and there's a wrong answer to this. There's multiple wrong answers. You're playing Stone Temple Pilots. What's your favorite song to cover?
That one we do.
And the correct answer is Plush. No, I'm kidding.
Well, we do Plush for sure. We actually do 3 Stone Temple Pilots songs. We do Plush. We do what the hell? Because the damn names of the songs, like
sing it. Just sing it right now.
Like, I am smelling like a rose.
That's right. That's sex type thing. We don't do that one, but
okay.
Yeah, there's a couple other
Creep.
Ones we do.
Creep.
Creed, we do Higher, and
Creed, yeah, nice.
Yeah. So I think we do Arms Wide Open for Bruner.
Wide open.
Yeah,
right.
That's great. Plush.
And the other ones are Wicked Garden.
Yeah, heck yeah.
Yeah.
And then the one that's got the word song in it, it's like the
Sing it. Sing it right now.
I'm drawing a blank now.
Sing it.
It's
Interstate Love Song.
Yeah, Interstate Love
Song.
Duh.
Yeah.
It had the word song in it.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's awesome. I'm gonna totally check out
I'll tell you, there was I can't remember exactly how many years ago it was. It was 7 or 8 years ago whenever the Stone Temple Pilots were actively looking for a new lead singer.
Yeah, when they took on Chester Bennington for a moment.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
So they had a
did you audition?
Well, you know what? This is back when we were super busy with our company. And I swear to God, the reason that I didn't enter it is because I was fucking sure that I was going to get it.
And
I did it.
So good.
Like I can do a hell of a Scott Weiland. Like our Stone
Dude,
Temple
I love Scott Weiland. You ever do Velvet Revolver at all?
We got, I'll tell you, there's a really good version of Velvet Revolver that's posted on our ZLMA Facebook page.
There.
We did last year on a really killer stage. We did
Fall to Pieces or Slither. Oh, cool. Yeah.
Fall to Pieces. You check that song out and tell me if
I'm there.
Yeah, we mentioned Velvet Revolver last episode. Actually,
did we really?
Yeah. All right. Well, while we mourn that you're not the lead singer of Stone Temple Pilots, we'll drink our delicious Wilderness Trail that you were making at the time, I guess.
Yeah.
So I got a question about Shane, though. So Shane, I saw he's a mechanical engineering background. Is that right?
Nice.
So I'm either going to strike gold with this question or just strike out. We'll see. But being an engineer, I know sometimes you got to cobble together a solution and somehow it just works. And sometimes it doesn't. But has there ever been anything at Wilderness Trail, in the up and coming years where Shane had to cobble together a ridiculous mechanical engineering solution for something that it's I cannot believe that worked, but somehow the engineer made it work?
Oh, absolutely, man. Shane is literally like modern day MacGyver. I mean, this guy give him a empty
paper clip,
bubble gum wrapper and a paper clip, and he'll build a nuclear bomb with it.
That's
But,
great.
there's just so many different things. I remember, many times leading up to, and he's done this also for a lot of our startup distillery customers. He's walking through the distillery and, to prevent the still from overpressuring, we have water bottles, okay? And they're filled with a certain amount of water. And if pressure blows that water out, that relieves the pressure, and then you fix whatever was causing the high pressure. So before we ever had our first day of startup, Shane was walking around the distillery and he's like, man, those those water bottles aren't big enough. And I'm looking at him like, well, if you say so. And he called Bendome and they were like, hey man, those should be the right size. And he's just kind of literally doing the math in his head on cylindrical volumes. And it was like, no, man, not according to my math. And so he got back in touch with him. They came and was like, holy shit, he's right. We got to take those off, replace them. So that's one thing. And another thing that we did that is just an ingenious move that saves us boatloads of money is, if you've ever been to a very large distillery, a lot of times there is like a hood that's situated down in the middle of the fermenter that comes out of the ceiling, and that's what pulls off the carbon dioxide. So that's a whole separate header system and everything.
Yeah.
Now, as part of our system, each fermenter gets its own dedicated fill header. That way we can clean them whenever we want to. We don't have to wait till, if you share a header system for multiple firms, sometimes you got to wait till the last fermenter is full before that header is empty and you can clean it. So each of our fermenters have their own fill headers. Knowing that, Shane postulated that, okay, well, hell, if the fermenter, once it's full, that line is empty, I'm going to use that line to pull the CO2 off. So we've got our fill headers are what we use to pull the CO2 off. And it's just an example of why do I need another 400 feet of HVAC system here when I can just make do with what I've already got in place. And so those types of things Shane is literally a genius at that kind of thing.
That's great.
And he's the best operations guy in the entire spirits industry.
That's awesome.
Believe it. That's so cool.
All right. Well, we might as well wrap up soon. Anything else you got, Bryan?
I do. Just one last thing.
Bring it on.
Tell us about your single barrel program. How does that work? Does it work for a small friend organization like ourselves?
Yeah.
How does one get involved with the single barrel program, and how does one, ultimately be able to participate in that?
Totally. Yep. So we're definitely well known for our single barrel program. We offer as much flexibility as possible with that. It's pretty much case by case basis, but anybody who's wanting to pick barrels, we should be able to accommodate. Our program it's the best barrel pick program out there, hands down. I'll just go ahead and announce it here on your show. A couple things. First of all, we have an excellent set of barrels at our distillery. To be exact, we've got over 250,000 barrels sitting there.
Whew.
Now, out of those all mostly excellent barrels, we have a lot of really killer barrels to pick from. So I've been to picks before where it's like, golly, man, I don't think we're going to be able to pick a damn barrel today. Unfortunately, that's kind of the state of the industry in some cases. Yeah. And I'm telling you, man, there's situations where the first year we offered barrel picks, well, I think we set aside 300 and we checked the inventory and it was like 900 were gone or something. And we're like, what the hell happened? We only set aside. It's like, no, you guys said you were going to do 300 barrel picks. But what we didn't realize that some people wanted to take home all 6 barrels. That's what got us. We just didn't say,
totally.
We can only have everybody who gets 1 barrel, So,
wow.
But yeah, man, the staff does a great. Riley and Bryan Sawyers, I'll give them a shout out. They're just a couple of our team that do an excellent job of curating the sample sets. That's nice. We're not just grabbing barrels and bringing it to you, or hey, this started with a 20 sample set, and then these are the 6 that nobody picked yet. So that's
exactly.
And man, you're gonna feel like you got the pick of the litter every time.
That's cool.
And
perfect.
There's never a it's usually a debate on, golly, man, you got people fighting over. I want barrel 1.
That's
I want
great.
barrel 3, I want
Yeah,
barrel
it's like,
4.
which one do we not take home?
Yeah, exactly.
But we take that super seriously because we're barrel pickers ourselves, you know.
Yeah.
And we love the event. We like the doing it, and we like to show people a good time, and we like to showcase our whiskeys, and that's a great way to do it.
Nice.
That's
Is that
awesome.
done locally?
Yeah, we prefer for you to come to the distillery. That's the best
Yeah.
experience. That way you get experience the warehouse, see where your barrel's at, you know.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a great experience.
That's cool. And
Sounds
so tell
amazing.
us where our listeners, because I believe it's at least most states. If it's in Virginia, it's in most states. So
yeah,
can
I
we
just did an
find
event in
Wilderness Trail
Virginia
everywhere?
a couple weeks ago, so I know we're in Virginia. We did a
Oh,
barrel pick,
nice.
actually.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Maybe that was what I
nice.
got. This maybe it
Mhm.
was a prior pick, but no, I wanted to show a screenshot. You really can't see this, but it says this is a stunner, absolutely delicious, dated 10/11/24 when I was drinking the my first sips of this Wilderness Trail bottle. And so
Just
it's
a
real,
little over a
listeners.
month ago.
Yeah, a little over. Wow, it's crazy. But listeners, everything they're putting out is amazing. And like I said, this is such an honor to have you on, Dr. Pat. And it's so cool to talk to like a person that takes science seriously. Like, I'm sure you're putting in plenty of hypotheses every day to say, like, how can we make this better? Which I love. So
Yep.
no,
Well, I appreciate y'all having me on here. Really do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you so
We'll
much.
take you anytime. And
I'm
maybe we'll get I hope we get a barrel pick in the future with you guys.
literally what I was about to say. I was going to say, I hope that we are able to do a chill filtered barrel pick someday. That'd be so much fun. But I also, since I got to do a unique one, I double hope that the 10-year, I want to see a gorgeous 10 on my neck tag someday. On a 10-year rye. Oh,
my
cool.
goodness.
Cool. Yes, I hope.
Yeah. Well, I have a hope that I'll throw in as well. I hope that everyone this Christmas season gets a chance to try Wilderness Trail bourbon and rye whiskey. I hope that every Scotch drinker in the world gets a chance to lay their lips on some Wilderness, as well as all the other partakers of alcoholic beverages.
Absolutely. I hope that, if you have, especially if you haven't tried Wilderness Trail, that you get your lips on some of that stuff too. But most of all, listeners, viewers, all our good friends, I hope that our love of whiskey lifted your spirits. Dude, I hope I'm buried in a charred oak casket one day.
Well, we've got about 10 people who have already said, if you do those, we want to sign up to be buried in them after the
Oh my gosh, that's
my goal in
amazing.
life now. My goal in death, I guess.